We think you should know that Imperfect Heroes podcast is a production of Little Hearts Academy USA.
You're listening to Imperfect Heroes, Insights into Parenting, the perfect podcast for imperfect parents looking to find joy in their experience of raising children in an imperfect world. And I'm your host, DJ Stutz. So today is a fifth Monday. With our new setup, we always do 4 deep dives into a specific topic, but once in a while, we get a month with 5 Mondays. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling some of the conversations that I have that we recorded earlier that don't quite fit into the set themes that we have for this year, but are so important and so interesting. And today is one of those episodes. So today we are talking about attachment. Now, both Laurie Couture and I have adopted kiddos out of the foster system, and so we're talking a little bit about that, but we're also talking about the importance of whether your child is an adopted child or a DNA kiddo. They still have these certain needs to be able to have the proper attachment that helps them build relationships and to be independent and to develop relationships that will last a lifetime so that they get to have maybe a 46th or a 50th wedding anniversary down the road, and they have children that they enjoy being with, that they're successful in their careers, and that they're happy human beings throughout the most of their life, which is their adulthood. So today, I hope you'll listen in. What a great episode we have. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for choosing to spend the next few minutes with Little Hearts Academy and Imperfect Heroes podcast, and I'm so glad that you're here. So before we get started, and we have so much to cover today, and it's so exciting, that I want to remind everybody that if you're listening, you can always catch us on YouTube and Rumble. So on YouTube, our channel is Little Hearts Academy USA, and on Rumble, our channel is just Imperfect Heroes. It's that simple. So if you are listening and you like what you hear, please hit that follow button, leave us a rating and review. 5 stars is the appropriate number of stars, and that always helps us get the word out. And if you haven't got it yet, you need to get it. Roman is Bigger. That's my new children's book. And, well, I guess it's not so new. It's been out for a few months by the time we have this out, and it's a fun book, and it's about vocabulary. And let me just remind everyone that vocabulary is a big deal on the success of our kids in life and in education. We have kids that come in that are sometimes 10,000 words behind in kindergarten. And so we want to talk to our kids and share vocabulary with our kids. That's one of the things that we really want to help our kids with. Helping them with vocabulary is really going to give them a step up. All right, let's get things going today. I have such a great guest, and we are talking about such an important piece. Whether you have an adopted child or whether you have a DNA child, this is a key piece that is going to help them throughout their whole life. And it starts even before they're born, and it's on attachment. And Laurie Couture is here, and she is an expert on this. And Laurie, we have so much in common with our stories. And I just was so drawn to you when we first heard it. And we had such a long conversation. Laurie, why don't you share who you are and what you have going on?
Well, thank you, DJ. Yes, I am Laurie Couture, and by trade, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm the author of Nurturing and Empowering Our Sons, my newest book that came out this year, and Instead of Medicating and Punishing. Right now, I provide consultation to agencies and programs that work with kids and families. And I sort of went off on my own track when I got into the professional fields. I worked in education. I worked in social services, especially with adoption and therapeutic foster care, juvenile justice, and mental health counseling. So 15 years as a therapist, specializing in childhood developmental trauma and EMDR for treating that. And I went off on my own, like I said, to basically learn what we weren't taught in not only college and grad school, but in our in-service trainings, in our professional development trainings. And I went and studied Paleolithic tribal societies and how they parented and educated in a way that did not lead to the behavioral learning and mental health issues that we see in industrialized societies and that we've seen since the dawn of agriculture and civilization. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I did, as DJ said, I'm also an adoptive mom, a very proud adoptive mom of a beautiful son, Bryson, who I adopted when he was 11. Tragically, he succumbed to his chronic suicidal ideation that went back as far as around 5 years old, according to records and his disclosures to me. Coming up on 6 years of that tragedy, and what I do to stay alive from losing him and being alienated from his daughter, my granddaughter, is I tell Bryson's story and I work very hard to prevent other kids from having to suffer what he suffered and to try to heal those families while there is still hope. And while your child is alive, there is still hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, too, you're so right in that we tend to come from that get over it kind of a mentality, or sometimes because we don't know what to do. And you bring up the point that he was having those ideations, those feelings, those emotions from age 5. And then that's before that he was in your life. And those who know my story, we adopted our youngest at age 12. And so that attachment and her story, of being 7 years in foster care and 11 placements and 2 failed adoptions and all of that really affected her ability to attach to people and the ability to feel that I am lovable. It is possible for
Yes.
others to love me. And she still struggles with that even today, even though she's making progress and doing great, and I'm very proud of her.
Yeah, that was a chronic issue for my son. As much as he adored us and our family
Mm-hmm.
and how much we cherished and treasured him, and he was just showered with love every
Mm-hmm.
single day of his life with us, in the end, he just believed that he was garbage. I mean, to use his words, he just
Mm-hmm.
could not believe that he belonged. He could not believe that he was wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, your daughter went through multiple placements. My son was in 15 different foster, respite, and residential placements. I mean, how can a child feel lovable and wanted and like they even deserve to take up space in this world when
Mm-hmm.
not only that happens, but the social workers show up at every transfer with a trash bag? How
Yeah.
can children feel like they're worth anything with those conditions?
Absolutely. And what that must feel. I know when she came to our home, yeah, it was trash bags of her
Yeah,
stuff was just in trash
yeah.
bags.
Same thing with
And
my son. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But another thing too is you don't have to have an adopted child for them to be struggling with attachment
No.
issues as well. It could be something, and it may not be something that you're even aware of necessarily. It could be something that maybe there's some teasing that's happened at school or in the neighborhood, or a tragedy that's happened, the loss of someone that's close to them, even the loss of a pet that we haven't been able to, oh, it was just a pet. Oh, they're young. Oh, they'll manage through it. I hear that excuse a lot, especially with my coaching and some of the work that I've done, even in my teaching, that this kiddo lost a pet, and I can see the kid is really struggling with that. And they're like, oh, it's just a pet. They'll get over it. And they may. Kids are different, and kids respond to different situations according to their own personality, and their own needs or whatever. But we need to really watch them and pay attention and not just write things off, but really pay attention. What are some of the things that we really need to watch out for with our kids, DNA and adopted?
Oh, yes, you're right, DJ, that I love how you use that term DNA children and DNA families. I think that's a great way to frame it. I think all parents, whether you're parenting a DNA child or an adoptive child, is that attachment disruption happens usually for things that in our culture, in our industrialized culture, we are told are just good parenting and educating.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, we have to take this back to the start in order to understand attachment. So, what attachment is, first of all, let's define attachment because a lot of people think it's just, oh, well, the child's clingy, or oh, it's just feelings of sentimentality and loving. No, Attachment is actually nature's symphonic process. It's a cyclical cycle. It's a cyclical cycle. That doesn't make sense, but cyclical process is what I meant.
Yes.
And nature has embedded this into every mammal, and I believe it's also in to some degree in birds and reptiles too, and maybe even some insects, because there's many of these other animals also have a caretaking element. However, let's focus on the mammals for now. This is embedded in every mammal. And basically picture a circle. DJ, can our audience see us?
If you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to show you something here, and then I'll describe it for those who can't hear it. So right here we
Okay.
have a circle with some arrows pointing in
Okay.
one
Yeah.
direction, and
Yeah.
it's in 4 different quadrants here. So at the top it says child has a need. Okay, now remember, a need is not a want. So a need is a physiological or an emotional developmental need that preserves homeostasis. So it's something that the body and brain need in order for the child to continue to thrive, to maintain homeostasis. So it's not, I need to go to the party and hang out with my friends. It's not, I need the latest iPhone. That's not what a need is. That's a want. So a need is something that will maintain homeostasis. And children of all ages, from pre-born children and infants to all the way through young adulthood, adolescence and young adulthood, have needs. So at the top
Can I
is
interrupt for
child has
just a
need.
second? For
Sure.
some of our parents, can you explain what homeostasis is?
I will get to that because at step 4, we're going to talk about it. So
All right.
absolutely. And that is, I'm so glad you said that, because homeostasis is a necessity in order to understand needs and attachment. So the child has a need. The child in the second quadrant here expresses the need. Now we, what do babies do when they have a need? They fuss, they cry. As kids get older, they may, if we're not listening when they're pointing and telling us, they may cry, they may tantrum, they may hit their sibling, they may do something. Teenagers will act out. There are multiple ways that children will express their needs. They will act tired and cranky. And now here at the bottom of the circle, the third quadrant, is the only magical place where we as parents can intervene. And what that step is, parent meets the need as soon as possible and with sensitivity, or helps the child meet the need. And then here's where homeostasis comes in. At 4, the fourth part of the quadrant is child feels homeostasis. So again, child has a need, child expresses the need, parent meets the need as soon as possible, child feels homeostasis. Now, what homeostasis is a feeling that all systems on the inside and outside are good. Everything feels great. The child feels relief, and thriving has now been restored. And what happens is when a child feels homeostasis, when they return to homeostasis, they feel safe, they trust you, they feel a sense of relief and a sense of joy and a sense of, and then they can attend to whatever they need to attend to in life. And then what happens is the child associates those feelings with you, and that's what's called secure attachment. Now, unfortunately, the only societies that really seem to put this at the forefront of their societies were the Paleolithic tribes and the hunter-gatherer tribes of the world. And they've existed all over, such as in South America, the North American Native Americans that were hunter-gatherers, and some of the African tribes as well. At the dawn of agriculture, and then throughout civilization and now industrialization, well, something else happened. So now I'm going to hold up a different chart here. What are you noticing about this one offhand, like right from the start, that's different from the other chart that I held up?
Well, the first thing I noticed is parents are not meeting the need. And so then
Well,
the rest of the process doesn't happen. A lot of
okay,
X's.
so you're noticing these big red X's, right? Okay, so what happens here is the child still has a need. The child still expresses the need in some manner. But here is where things fall off the tracks. The train falls off the rails, so to speak. The parent fails to meet the need. They do not show sensitivity to the need. They delay, deny, or do not meet the need. So is the child now going to feel homeostasis? No, of course not. They feel distress. they now have become the opposite of homeostasis, which is dysregulated. And with dysregulation, they feel panic, anxiety, anger, rage, and a lack of trust and a lack of safety. And when they associate those feelings with you, that is what we call insecure or disrupted attachment. Now, sadly, when the next need comes along, the other previous need doesn't just magically go away, it isn't erased. So, what happens is all of these new needs that start coming down the track, if we picture this like a train track, start smashing up against one another, and you have this twisted wreck. And that's where you start getting into trauma. Now, you can have a trauma if one instance of not meeting a need is really extreme. So it doesn't necessarily have to be chronic unmet needs or a severe trauma such as physical, sexual, and emotional abuse to cause trauma.
Sure.
It can be a lack of homeostasis that was really intense and scary. So what has happened here is in our industrialized cultures, most of us have grown up with this, which is the insecure or disrupted attachment. Now, our adoptive children suffer what's called extreme attachment disruption, usually, or sometimes even full attachment breaks, which is when they are removed from the birth family and they are immediately thrown into a situation where they do not have a permanent parent. They have either foster parents. My son was put almost immediately into a residential facility. He went to a foster home for a night or two, I believe. And then he went right into a residential facility when he was 4.5 years old. Whereas his siblings went right to their future adoptive families. That doesn't mean there's less trauma, but it does mean that the attachment issues will be more severe in the child that has to wait for permanency. My son had to wait over 7 years for permanency. But in the case of, let's say, parents say, but you know what, I've done everything right from the beginning and I've loved my child. We do all kinds of things. I buy them everything. They have the typical American or Western or even Eastern child life. I'm here to tell you that that lifestyle is what also disrupts attachment. It can be mild, it can be moderate, but the way to know is if your child is showing emotional, behavioral, or learning problems at school, then there is a disrupted attachment. And a lot of times when I have worked with families that have been very loving and nurturing at home, it is when they send their child off to daycare or school, or when the child is in school, that their needs are not being met. It doesn't matter what grade level, it can be preschool to 12th grade. If your child is in public school, I can guarantee you their needs are not being met, and they haven't been for years. So that creates insecure attachment.
And it's interesting. So we had 4 children before we adopted our youngest. And my second child, my son, Shiloh, was in public schools and he was doing really well. And actually, it turned out some of his teachers were family friends. And so they were invested in him and they really enjoyed him. And so he was in an environment where his sense of humor was appreciated, where his ability, like he would open doors and help girls with their backpacks, put them on if they were struggling, or he would notice things. And he had a quirky sense of humor, but his teachers seemed to get a kick out of it. And then he went into 4th grade, where he had a teacher who made fun of him when he would open the door for her. Is like, what, you think I can't open a door? Or when he would help someone with their coat or their backpack. What, you think she's weak? Very, yeah. Yeah. And in fact, we went to a parent-teacher conference and she sat down and I had Shy with me. I always took my kids with me to a parent-teacher conference. And she looked at me and said, I can't think of one good thing to say about Shiloh.
Oh my God.
He's sitting next to me.
God.
And I said, well, then I guess we're done. And I got up and
I guess we're done. Yeah.
And I went straight to the principal's office.
Oh
And
my God.
and we were on a track system there because they were doing year-round schools in Vegas then, and there was no other place to send him. And this was a long time ago, and homeschooling really wasn't a big deal. Like, I didn't know anything about it really, and so he
Hmm.
talked to her or whatever. But I'll tell you, that year destroyed him
Oh,
as
oh, I
like
bet it did.
he
I
started
bet it
acting
did.
out in school. He really had a struggle educationally from then on. And it's funny that after he was out of high school, we wound up moving to a different area to get my younger kids out of a bad high school and into a better school. And he came home from college and he said, "Mom, I just saw Mrs. So and so."
Oh,
I'm like, "What?" He goes, "She's moving in right now, like 5 houses down."
oh,
I'm
oh
like, "You gotta be
God.
kidding me."
Yeah, what are the
And
chances of that?
yeah, yeah. And you could even see that even when he was in college, he's that old and coming home. And I think he was 21. I mean, he was in his 20s. He was coming home from the summer. I mean, he was almost done with college. And you could see that it still rattled him to see her.
Oh, absolutely. It probably always will. I mean, it's a trauma what he
Mm
went through. And you're
hmm. Mm
right.
hmm.
I mean, years and years ago, our parents didn't have the option of homeschooling. They didn't know a lot about it. There weren't a
Right.
lot of options like there are now. But
Mm
today,
hmm.
we do have that. Today's parent
Yes.
needs to say, I am pulling my child from this school today.
Mm
And
hmm.
either homeschooling or finding one of the many options that
Mm
are
hmm.
available, including free options. Like one of the brand new ones that came out of the pandemic was called Learning Pods. And
Yes.
learning pods are like a hybrid between homeschooling and what used to be a homeschool co op. So there's no excuse at this point. Every
Right.
parent, no matter, I was a single working parent living on an impossible income, and I unschooled and homeschooled my son from 12 years old through graduation. As soon as our adoption was finalized in court,
Yeah.
we took the leap. And even before that, what I did, because I just did not have the heart to put him in public school when he
Mm
was
hmm.
placed with me, because he was already in one, and I saw what it was doing to him. And just those few weeks before he could come home, it was killing me to watch what the last public school was doing to him. I was on the phone every day with that principal saying, can't you just do this? Can't you just have him job shadow one of the school nurse or the lunch servers or anybody? Could you just do something to treat this child with some sort of love and respect? No, he's going to do his work, or we're going to tell him you're not going to get to come in on that last day to sit with him. It was just a nightmare, just those 3 weeks until he came home. So there was
Yeah.
no way I could put him in a public school in my area. So what I did is, where I was working at the time, I worked out of state. There was a beautiful child-centered private school that I had actually referred many of my clients to, so they knew me. And they did not offer scholarships or payment plans, but
Mm.
I literally begged. I begged the headmaster, and I talked to her about my goals with my son. I talked to her about what he was enduring and what he had been through. And she ended up giving me both a scholarship and a payment plan. And
Wow.
I said, I just need you to keep him here safe. He may do no work for you. He may act out every day, but just keep him safe for me. And then he will be out of your hair in about, 8 or 9 months or so. And they did a really good job of basically managing him, because he was very difficult for them because of all the traumas he had gone through. But they treated
Right.
him largely with love and respect. And it was a play-based school, so he was outside all the time. And he did probably learn more there than he
Mm
had
hmm.
at any of the public schools in all those years. So he
Yeah.
also met his lifelong best friend there, which was great. So when we started the homeschooling journey, then he was free to basically decompress and detox from that.
Mm
So
hmm.
anybody can do it that is a loving, caring, safe home. And there are multiple options. And in my second book,
Right.
Nurturing and Empowering Our Sons, I have a whole chapter of all the alternatives to traditional public schooling. And each one is graded by what I call nature's intent for the child's cognitive and basically holistic development. So if we consider that public school is probably would be graded an F by nature, then what is A, what is B, what is C?
Mm hmm.
And so there are way more options than parents think there are. So I really struggle when somebody says my child has to go to school and go into this environment that is bullying them,
Right.
destroying them emotionally, creatively, intellectually.
And like I said, for Shiloh, he had, for the first kindergarten through third grade, he had teachers that thought he was great and loved him and
Yeah.
whatever were positive. And even with my son Christian, who, was Mr. ADHD, lots of energy. And he got to sixth grade, and I had been super involved in the school. I was PTA president at that
Yeah.
school. I knew the principal really well, blah, blah, blah. And he had a math teacher and he was in developmental math. He just struggled with math. And this teacher you could see, we went into back to school night at the beginning. And when we went up and introduced ourselves as we're Christian's parents, and you could just see, like, he almost started shaking. He just did he doesn't like our son. Again, went straight to the principal, who now was a friend because I was super involved in the school. And I said, yeah, nah, we can't do this. And she said, the only other class that I even have any room in is an honors math class. And he's in developmental. I said, well, he's going to fail developmental or he's going to fail honors math. It's an F either way.
That's right. Might as well put him in the honors.
Yeah, yeah. But she had said, well, this is a teacher that I hired because she had a daughter the same age as my son. And she said, this is a teacher I hired just because I wanted her to teach my daughter. She's really, really good. I'm like, let's do it. Let's do it. This teacher was so on task, so wonderful. He wound up with the highest grade in the class, in honors class, from developmental.
My gosh.
He didn't even have to take the final because she said, even if he gets an F, he's still got an A. So I'm going to reward him. And he got to go do something fun during the final. And so there are options that are available. But here's the deal is you have to know the school. You have to make those relationships. Because what was the deal with my son Shiloh? I had relationships with those teachers. And this fourth grade teacher, her door was closed to me. She didn't want that relationship with me. So pay attention to what's going on with your kid and try to be that positive, helpful person. But if that door is closed to you, then you got to move on. You got to make other arrangements.
You bring up a perfect point. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, if your child is doing well and there aren't any problems and there are some issues at home that need to be dealt with, we'll deal with those first and then look at the school later. But unfortunately, like you said, DJ, your son Shiloh may have had those first 3 teachers that were phenomenal, or what I call gem teachers.
Yes.
But unfortunately, those gems don't last. If you get one of those, basically coal teachers, like the coal in the Christmas stocking teacher, like the 4th grade teacher that he had, then your child can go from being a happy, exuberant, thriving child to a child who has now suffered a serious trauma that could affect him or her for the rest of their lives. So I call public school Russian roulette because you never know who you're going to get for a teacher. And in high school and in middle school, the child is with multiple teachers per day. So let's say they have 1 or 2 gem teachers, but the rest of the teachers are either mediocre or just do not care about that child or even flat out abusive. Well, talk about a crazy making experience. In high school, I had a couple gems and one particular gem teacher. I will never forget him. His name was Mr. Whipple. He was like the hippie. He was the ex-hippie, ex-60s hippie teacher. And he was so funny. He ended up giving me his Beatles album collection because he had no children of his own. And he saw that I was really into learning about rock and roll history. My parents taught me a lot about the Beatles. And to this day, I still have some of those records. And what it was is that this was a teacher who really genuinely cared about each student. He was one of those teachers that would be like, why are you raising your hand to go to the bathroom or get a drink? Just go. And you're like, no, Mr. Whipple, you don't understand. We have to in other classes. And he's like, well, he says, I would imagine when you need those things, so go and do it. And so it was hard because in his class, we were treated like human beings and our needs were met. But when we go back into the next class, we were treated like we were subhuman. And so that's the problem is your child might have 1 gem, but that doesn't mean the next teacher or the others will be gems also. Chances are they'll just be mediocre.
Right. So one of the things that I really focus on, and I've done a lot of studying, because they didn't push this when I was having my kids, was that early attachment. And we've got some great things that are going on now. We're learning about skin to skin contact with
Oh,
brand new
yes.
babies
Oh,
and
yes.
developing that ability to attach from day one, right away. And in fact, I've told this story before, but I have 12 grandkids, and one
Oh,
of my
wonderful.
yes, it's so much fun. So one of my grandsons, Sylvan, he's 7 now, but when he was born, it was very traumatic. I won't go into the story, but an emergency C-section, and what happened was then my daughter Rocky was not capable. They had put down they wanted to do skin to skin, but my daughter Rocky was incapable because of the type of the emergency that was going on. And so this nurse, who was brilliant, came and said, I see on the chart that you wanted to do skin to skin, and she's clearly not able to. And so she looked at my son-in-law Peter and said, would you like to do the skin to skin? And he just, what, I can do that? And she's like,
You
yeah, just
should
rip
do
off your
that.
shirt. Yeah. So man, his shirt
Not,
came right off.
yeah.
And they put Sylvan next to him, and I got to witness all of this. And he's holding this little teeny baby that was so pale. I mean, I thought maybe he was an albino, just with there. And he has a very fair skin, like he has cotton candy, white hair. And there he is with his daddy, just holding him skin to skin. And as Rocky was
Now,
recovering.
here's where I want to
Mm-hmm.
just say something, because with the skin to skin contact, this is
Mm-hmm.
something that a child cannot survive without. But to have dad do it was beautiful. What happens if your 9-year-old wants to adhere to your body, which kids like to do, and you have been told, well, they're too old for that? There's this idea in the attachment parenting world that attachment parenting is something for the first 3 to 5 years of life, that you offer breastfeeding for the first year, you offer skin to skin for the, those first few months of life. And then once the child is about 5 or 6 years old, then you cast them away for the state to raise them. But the reality is there is no time when your child doesn't need contact with the parent. This changes with time, but there always needs to be that piece. When they're little, they like to adhere to the parent for the first few years of life. Then as they get older, the only reason they pull away from hand holding and love, with their, that like to snuggle and have their head stroked and their face
Mm-hmm.
stroked,
Mm-hmm.
the only reason they pull away from that is because of our industrialized society teaching us that we should pull away from that. And when they're in school, they learn this whole other way of being, that your family isn't the focus, but your peer group is the focus. And so it is not natural for that skin to skin to stop. It changes and evolves. But the problem is you have basically a world full of skin to skin starved people. And we also know that boys receive less skin to skin nurturance than girls do. So while the hospital was saying, okay, well, let's artificially recreate this for the infancy from the newborn period, what
Mm-hmm.
they didn't seem, I don't know this, but what I'm going to guess is that they didn't tell your daughter and the baby's dad that this needs to ideally continue, and the child will let you know when it's time to shift, because the child will naturally have boundaries as their need for skin to skin starts to fill up like a bottle. It fills up, and that changes when
Right.
there is like sort of a trendy focus,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, breastfeeding. They
Mm-hmm.
don't tell you that a child needs to wean on their own and that the worldwide average is 4.2 years of breastfeeding. They don't tell you that. They say breastfeed for the first year. And so
Right.
that's just one of many of the needs. We can't get into them all now, but it's all laid out in my two
Right.
books, the developmental needs that kids have, that even if it looks like they didn't suffer any major traumas, if these needs are unmet, it can create problems later that the child will never be able to tell you,
Right.
because they don't remember that, on a
Right.
conscious level, but they remember it on a subconscious level.
Right. Well, and two, there are times when just that snuggling and that hugging and that is so important. It's fine to just movie night or whatever, and you're just snuggling with your kids or when they're going to bed. And so you've got little kids that maybe you're trying to get them to go to bed on their own or whatever. And spending some time, just that snuggling, reading a story, and you're next to them, mom or dad, because I think it's really important that dads make that attachment. We tend to think of that as a mom thing to do.
No, it's both parents. Children
It's
need to have a
both parents.
secure attachment with both parents.
Yes. And so
Mom lays the blueprint, but dads are not second best. They are crucial.
absolutely. And so, like my grandson Sylvan, he is so attached to his dad. It's just a lovely thing to see.
I just wanted to bring this back to the secure attachment cycle, that the way we get back on the secure attachment cycle, if there have been some attachment wounds, is just what you said, to start snuggling with your kids, no matter their age.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be snuggled yet, you start with a touch on the hand or on the
Mm-hmm.
head or on the shoulder. Start with massage. The key is, no matter what age your child is, physical affection, physical and emotional nurturance are nature's way of healing the secure attachment. Getting back on that secure attachment cycle requires meeting the needs, and one of the most prominent needs for a child is skin to skin and emotional contact. So,
Mm-hmm.
what I would suggest is not the movie night, but instead read together on the couch, face to face, eye gazing, looking at one another,
Mm.
listening to the heartbeat. Putting the screens there really puts barrier between the child and the parent. And so what we want to do is we want to make it more engaged. When you're reading to the child or you're talking to the child, you can have them in your embrace, in your arms, and you're hearing one another through the body, that echoing sensation. They can hear
Mm-hmm.
your heartbeat. You're rubbing their face, you're snuggling with them. That is what our kids need. They need that when they're toddlers. They need that when they're preteens. They need that when they're teens. And even our college age kids want that from time to time when they're really struggling with something and they just need
Mm-hmm.
that. So be available for that. And it really is up to the parent to make that effort and not just say, well, if my kid comes to me, I'll do it. Especially if they have been standoffish, it's because they have insecure attachment. And really, it's the parent that needs to set this cycle back in motion of healing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, do snuggle. It doesn't mean you can't do movie nights here and there. That's great too. But if that's the only time you snuggle, then you're putting a barrier between
Right.
you and your child, and that eye gazing, which is important. As they get older, that's a little harder. And with teenagers who are really shut down, I like to do basically car rides. You can still have the touch in the car, putting your hand on their hand, rubbing their head. Older kids, especially boys, love to talk in the car. They'd be looking at you necessarily directly in the
Right.
face when they're older. And a lot of that has to do with their own attachment issues, especially if they're on the spectrum. So my son,
Right.
even when he was 23 years old, he had to start almost every day with me, holding him on the couch for even just a few minutes, just to get him in a space of equilibrium. Because I think whatever traumas had happened to him, he must have had a lot of traumas from the morning, because his mornings were just awful, absolutely awful. He could not get his day started without having that sort of period of just equalizing and getting at
Mm-hmm.
homeostasis. And after his routine, I had to hold him sometimes just for a minute or two, but other times it was longer.
Wow. Well, and two, you brought up before, like even just a hand massage. That's
Mm-hmm.
something my kids really enjoyed, was just a hand
Yes.
massage. And sometimes even would be sitting in church and they'd kind of reach and put my hand on their back and want me to
Yes.
just scratch their back. But just that kind of a touch. In fact, that's how I would get my kids. They napped all the way through kindergarten. They just needed that. And Rocky, all the way through first grade, she'd come home from
Oh,
school and she was done and she would just fall
oh,
asleep. So we gave in to
yeah,
that, and
yeah,
she would come home and nap for an hour and then she was fine for the rest of the day. But
yeah.
she always wanted that hand massage though. She was
Oh,
dozing off to sleep. And so that was kind
that's
of our
so sweet.
connection thing. Oh, so much fun. But
That's
anyway,
very
so
sweet.
yeah, I mean, so it doesn't have to be a huge, big deal. It can be something like you said, as simple as just maybe rubbing their head or just putting your fingers through their hair. It's
Oh
very
yeah.
soothing, very soothing.
Some
And
kids like to be scratched at the back of the head. Some
mm-hmm,
kids like find out what sensory modality, if you will, your kids love. Some kids don't
mm-hmm,
like light touches. Some kids like
yeah,
really hard massages. Some kids like to be scratched. Some do like more gentle touches. So find out what it is that
yeah.
your child loves, because that way that will enhance the connection rather than cause an annoyance. One of the things
And
that
remember,
some
it
studies have
just because it works for one kid in your family doesn't mean it's going to work for the next kid. Like each
absolutely,
child is
exactly.
individual, right?
Each child is different. Each child wants
Mm-hmm,
something different. I've noticed that with the kids in my own family. The other thing, too, studies have shown that mothers who have insecure attachments to their children have a tendency to touch with the fingertips instead of with the whole hand. So if you
mm,
find yourself touching your child too much with just the fingertips, try to put the whole hand on the face or on the back or on the shoulder or on the
hmm.
head, because it's a more soothing touch than just a fingertip, which tends to convey anxiety and lack of connection. And it can actually feel uncomfortable to kids to just be touched with the fingertips. So try to keep that in mind and put the whole palm and the whole hand down. That's an interesting thing that came out of some studies that I read. I cite them
Oh,
in the book, so that is in there.
cool. Well, speaking of the
So yes,
book, why don't you tell our listeners how they can find out more and maybe even contact you and get some more information?
sure, thank you. Nurturing and Empowering Our Sons is the most recent book. The other book is Instead of Medicating and Punishing, and those are both available on Amazon as well as on Barnes and Nobles. And you can learn a little bit more about me at lauriecouture.com. I also have a Substack with that name and a YouTube channel. So again, that's lauriecouture.com. And yeah, I think that covers it.
I hope everyone will investigate you and some of the things that you have, because you have just such a great insight on that attachment, because attachment is the key. You know, we talk about the relationships and building those relationships, but it's through attachment that we're going to be able to build those relationships. And if we can start
Yes.
early on, and like I say, it starts even before they're born with
Yes.
the sounds and the emotions of the mom. These babies feel whether they're wanted or if there's a lot of stress, you know, what's
Yes.
going on. They can feel that. That has an effect on how they
Absolutely.
attach as they get older. So, pretty cool stuff. And so, I hope everyone will check her out. So, Laurie, I always ask my guests the same question. And so, I'm going to ask you, we know there's no perfect parent ever in the history of the world.
No,
And
no.
no, even Mary and Joseph were mortal. And so,
Yeah.
but some parents seem to be a little more successful than others. And so I wonder, what would you consider a successful parent?
A successful parent works on their own developmental trauma so that they are conscious and aware of how their own traumas and their own attachment issues are affecting their ability to connect with their own child. It's not about blaming your own parents or your children or your grandparents. No, every single generation does the best that they can. They have all suffered trauma, and this goes back hundreds of generations. But now that we know, now we have the responsibility to do something about it and to make it right with our own children. So a successful parent does that, and they put the needs of their children first before their own conveniences. And our children only have one childhood. They are only going to
Mm-hmm.
be young once. Nature just asks that we give them about 21 years or so of actual intensive need meeting. That doesn't mean that we just check out after, but we've got to at least get them through that period. And
Right.
ultimately, we hope that that attachment will be secure all through the rest of their lives.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, for sure. What a great answer. And I think you're the first one that I've talked to in hundreds of episodes. Well, not hundreds, but over 100, well over 100 episodes that mentioned they deal with their own stuff and they get their own stuff figured out. And I like that because we all have our own trauma that we're dealing with. And sometimes we don't understand how that trauma is affecting the rest of our family.
That's right. And we need to get supports when we need them. That's my biggest thing in the end, with my son, I wish I had been able to get more supports for myself so I could have given even more of myself to him at the end. That's the thing, is that a lot of times if we're struggling with our kids, it's because we don't have enough professional
Yeah.
supports in our lives and supports from friends and family. And instead of us complaining about that, well, we need to find those communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find them in all kinds of places. Sometimes it's a
Yes.
surprise. Sometimes it's a surprise you find them in
Yes.
unexpected places, which is kind of cool. So,
You're right,
anyway,
DJ.
well, thank you. Laurie, I just so appreciate that you spent the time here. And for our listeners, be sure to hit that follow button and leave us a rating and review. And we love your comments. We really do. And so I'd love to hear what you're thinking. And so until next time, let's find joy in parenting. See you guys. Thanks, Laurie.